Hi guys, just thought I'd do another wee video. I'm going to try and do these if I can once a week, just based on conversations I have during the week with people or at the weekend. So, kind of more nutrition based as usual, uh, and it's more based on like people's thinking. I think so. I'm trying to like talk about the thought processes that people might have because I think if one person has that thought process, the chances are other people do. So, one of the most common things that people have been saying this week of the few conversations I have is one that they're managing to focus on getting a better protein intake, but mainly only on the days they train. So that's the first sort of point I think is worth making is that the goal of the elevated protein intake has to be every day. So the goal is to do it every day, kind of non-negotiable, kind of like a habit, like brushing your teeth or something like that. So try and do it every day. You might not manage to get to 100 grams a day, for example, of protein every day, but that's what to aim for every single day without fail. And it's about that consistent approach that will eventually pay off over a time period of maybe 6 weeks, 4 weeks, that kind of thing. The next thing was some people find the thought of 100 grams or 120 grams or 150 grams of protein a day quite a lot, or how they're going to attain that. So, but when you put it into context of food, it's actually not that much if you can be a bit prepared. So, for example, like a chicken breast, a full chicken breast has about 40 grams of protein. So if you have a protein supplement, which is 30 grams of protein in a whey protein supplement, then right away, 40 plus 30, obviously 70, you're only 30 grams away. So if you have two protein supplements a day and one of your meals is a full chicken breast, you've hit 100 grams of protein a day, which is a sort of bare minimum for a lot of folk, or should be, of those that are trying to achieve a bit of fat loss. So that's that. Hopefully, giving a bit of context to it. So an egg is about 8 grams. So if you had a 3 egg omelette, that's about 24, 25 grams right there. So when you put it like that, it shouldn't be as unattainable as some people might initially think. It's about also getting practical, and just doing the things that you think you can do based on your lifestyle. So I understand the sort of advice I would have given 10 years ago has changed somewhat now because now I've got kids and I realise how difficult it is to cook everything from scratch and to source whatever the most finest food and all that. So, like having something like we've got a toasty machine. Now I find myself now having toasties like quite not regularly, but like they're sort of an emergency food that I'm finding I'm having. So I have a packet of chicken, and then so a lunch sometimes for me if I've not got time to cook, which does sometimes happen, would be like a for me I'm about 90 kilos, 6'1", very much active. So, but I would have like a three layer bit of bread toasty, with a full packet of the snacky chicken, which is about 30 grams of protein, with some cheese in the layers. And I find that's really, it takes 2 minutes, right? So it doesn't always have to be this perfect food all the time, and that if you've got the time to cook a lovely stir fry from scratch for lunch, or cook yourself some nice sweet potatoes or baked potatoes, then great. But if you don't, there is options that you can still manage to hit something that's nutritionally pretty dense. Okay, so bear that in mind as well. I would sometimes think about the whole concept of protein and the repetitive nature of this message and how it sounds. If you were to take it out of context, like with every day to day life, it sounds a bit unnecessary, maybe, and it sounds maybe a bit like nuts. Like you need protein all the time, and it does get me. I do often think about that, like because it's not that you need. It's not like because if you hit a protein target, you can't fail. Of course, you can still fail. But one of the reasons anyway, that the protein targets are focusing on like higher protein meals and foods is so essential is partly to do with the culture that we're surrounded by. And what I mean by that is that generally speaking, I would say that like it's set up, culture set up with supermarkets and shops and everything. It's very very accessible. It's set up to make it very easy to become overweight to a point where it can impact on your health. So that's part of the problem. So obviously, if you lived like in some sort of, if in a desert island, or you lived in somewhere very remote where access to food and drink of anything you wanted really wasn't that accessible or limited, or access was limited, you wouldn't you wouldn't need to like, source protein supplements and focus on, oh, I need a protein fix here, because you just have to take what you've got. But the problem is, in this country, where we are, like, there's access to everything basically. Um, you can eat whatever you want, whenever you want, really. If you're, especially now with phone apps, you can just order anything, and it's at your door within half an hour. So, it's not that. So that's why, like, the whole concept of, like, you have to choose to sort of like fight against your surroundings in that respect, and that's one way of doing it. So it doesn't mean that if you have a low protein diet, then you're guaranteed to be unhealthy and you're guaranteed to gain weight. Of course you're not. It depends on the culture you're surrounded by, and that's why it's almost like a piece of armory. Higher protein diets are a piece of armory to help fight all the constant, like, um, temptations around you in terms of food and drink. You just look at the supermarkets. You walk in and you're just surrounded by it. You go to the supermarket, you're waiting in the aisle to pay, and they don't have the fruit and veg lined up as you're waiting in the queue to pay, because no one wants to buy that stuff really. They've got chocolate and sweets because everyone wants to buy it, and it's the same in, like, the petrol stations. It's all the sweets that are lined up as you're waiting to pay for your food, because they know that people are tempted to buy that stuff, and that is very much the case. So, e- so higher protein diets, as we know, they have a sort of very much a hormonal effect that can help you um, opt less for other types of foods and eat less of other types of foods. So when it comes back to the whole, like, calories in, calories out concept of all that matters is calories, it's not actually, when it comes to weight loss, it's not as simple as that. Yeah, on a simple level of an equation, yeah, that's what it is. But two things: it doesn't take into account, like, the type of weight loss, fat loss, or muscle loss, and the second thing it doesn't take into account is that the type of foods you eat will help to or contribute to determine how much you eat. Okay, so on a subconscious level, and that's what I mean. So you're trying to, by having a higher protein diet, you're trying to preempt the likelihood of getting hungrier. So if you skip breakfast, for example, you might be starving by lunchtime. And if you're starving, you're not going to want to sit down and have a nice, lovely stir fry, or a nice. You're just going to probably want to grab something that's quite palatable and sweet. Um, so that's it's a preemptive action. Taking a higher protein diet every day and consuming it every day is a preemptive action to reduce the likelihood of you then struggling to then resist other foods, especially at night when you're, like, if you've had a long day at work, you've been tired, or you're dealing with kids and you just want something to satisfy you. You raid the cupboards, and that's what tends to happen. So I just wanted to make that point. That it's not like if you don't consume protein, you're doomed for all time. It's not to do with that. It's to do with the culture that we're in, and you're trying to preempt and take more control. So yeah, calories in versus calories out. It's all about that, inverted commas, on one level, but the types of food you eat will determine how much you consume. As we've gone over so many times now, I don't want to risk repeating myself. So I just wanted to, like, put a wee few points about that. So if you're someone that skips breakfast, then might be an idea that's when to have a protein supplement. Just 300 mils of water, scoop of whey protein, tan it, 30 seconds, done. And it will have, whether you realise it or not, it will have an effect on what food choices you make later at lunchtime. And then what you have at lunchtime will determine what food choices you may or may not make at dinner time, and then in the evening. Which, in other words, it makes what you're trying to do easier to achieve on a short term, medium term, and long term basis, because it reduces the sort of, like, cravings and all that. Yeah, you can resist them for a certain amount of time with your, like, I was about to say well-being, your willpower, but you can't fight that the willpower. You can't rely on that forever, because hormones are more powerful than your willpower, and eventually that will sort of kick in. So hope that makes a bit of sense. Hope it answers or clarifies a few things. If it raises more questions than answers, please ask. Like, I'm posting the page. It gives me something to talk about as well that's relevant to you, as opposed to me just selecting something that I think might help and that might not. Okay, so that's what to do. Email me or post on the page, because if you're posting the page, then someone else might have the same query, so it might be an opportunity to answer for more than one person at once. So anyway, that'll do. Look at that, less than 10 minutes. Cheers.